Hi, everybody. So this is a rare privilege. I have to say, most of the writing that I've done, the books that I've written, have been about people who are no longer on this earth. And here I have the pleasure of being able to teach about someone who's right in front of us. And both of us, I think, are a little bit nervous about this. So you're going to make us feel comfortable. I'm going to be turning to Syed Kashua to ask him whether he thinks what I'm saying about his fiction is correct. And he's going to, I don't know, hopefully be kind to me. But we're very, very grateful to have this opportunity to have the subject of our discussion, the author of these wonderful stories here with us. And hopefully he'll also be able to tell us about current work, about other things that we didn't, I didn't directly assign, namely his work for television and so on. So I want to begin with a provocative idea that was presented in an article by a woman named Deborah Kamen, who is an arts columnist for Variety magazine. And she wrote an essay back in 2013 in which she referred to Syed Kashua, our honored guest here, as the greatest living Hebrew writer, in an essay called "The Greatest Living Hebrew Writer is Arab." When I teach modern Jewish literature, I prod and provoke my students to try and figure out what Jewish literature is, how you even define it. And often people want to say that Jewish literature is either literature written by Jews or Jewish literature is literature written in a Jewish language. Well, Syed Kashua, whom I imagine is not aspiring to write Jewish literature, nevertheless, Syed Kashua makes things complicated for us because he writes in beautiful and distinctive Hebrew. And he, in some respects, I want to argue, takes up themes that are really part of the classic modern Jewish literary canons, specifically Jewish literature, from the diaspora. And so what we have in Syed Kashua is an author who, in his Hebrew writing, basically takes up a posture or a set of themes that are very reminiscent to us from Yiddish literature and literature before the state of Israel. Some of this can also be said about Etgar Keret. Etgar Keret, who we met last week, is a writer who does not like to present heroic, masculine figures. He too has a certain kind of affinity, one could say, with themes from Yiddish literature. But I'm beginning with this, number one, just because of the provocation of it. And because I'd love to hear Syed's own sense of this. In this essay, Deborah Kamen argued, she drew a connection between the work that Syed Kashua is doing as a Hebrew writer and the creator of Hebrew and Arab television in Israel. And of course, this is an essay that was written before Syed relocated to the United States. In this essay, she looked at a story by Mendele Moicher Sfarim, which is the pen name of Shalom Yankiv Abramovich, whom people say was the founder of modern Yiddish literature and modern Hebrew literature. And in this story, Shem v'Yafet ba'agala, or Shem and Yafet on the train, we meet the persona of Mendele the book peddler, who is taking a train ride with an exiled, impoverished Jewish family. And in the same train cabin, in addition to Mendele, and in addition to this impoverished Jewish family, is a Polish exile who has kind of joined their familial clutches. And in that story, you have the sense of a Gentile being crammed into the train car with the Jews and their experiences. When I say train car, I'm not trying to conjure up Holocaust images or anything like that. This is a story from 1890. What Deborah Kamen was arguing is that Syed Kashua, in being in the crammed train car of Israeli culture at that time in 2013, was like the new Yefet, the new Yefet of Jewish literature. Are you familiar with this, Syed? Have you heard anyone look at you as a kind of a new Yiddish writer in Israel?
Yes, but I don't know what to do about it. Honestly, I mean, also Edgar that you mentioned, I think in one of the interviews he said the last living writer in Israel is Said, but I don't know what to do with that really. I mean, I'm not Jewish. I did my best to become one, but I was rejected, I guess. And also, I think I don't know how what is Jewish writing, as you mentioned, and because usually when we talk about Jewish writing, we talk about the European or East European specifically tradition of writing or of humor. Usually, I'm accused of to have Jewish humor. But if you look at the Iraqi Jews or the Egyptian Jews or the coming from Arab Muslim countries, so I think it's a completely different, if it's completely, but it's a different kind of humor. So I'm not sure about. So also when we talk about Jewish humor, it seems like the East European hegemonic idea of Jewish humor controls. But I guess I'm flattered. I always wanted to be an Ashkenazi Jew, so
So one of the ways in which we started this three-part course is looking at the way in which more recent Israeli literature is trying to move away, or has moved away from that Ashken normative definition. So with this new wave come new voices from other places, Mizrahi voices, women's voices, and also instead of big stories that try and cover everything, a kind of smaller genre, not claiming to speak for everyone. And so in including you in this group, it was really an effort to try and be as provocative as possible and talk about how far can we push the boundaries, what does it mean to include you in this canon of Israeli literature. Also, by the way, at a time when you yourself are expressing real misgivings about being, a member of Israeli culture. So we'll continue this. So just a little bit about Said's biography. Said Kashua is an Israeli Arab, but with Palestinian origins, correct? You have family, yeah. Grew up in Tira, which is in an area in Israel called the Mishulash that straddles, that's a kind of in a middle zone between what people call Israel proper and post-67 territories. As you might, often it's come up in our classes. How much of this is based on the author's personal biography? Well, some of what you read today, a good deal of what you've read today, is based in, has its kernel is a nut in Kashua's personal story, having been accepted into the Israel Arts and Science Academy, a Jerusalem boarding school for gifted teens. And so that story that you were exposed to, that you read, those sections from his first book from 2002, which was published under the Hebrew title Aravim Rokdim and translated as Dancing Arabs. That is the fictional scenario. An Arab Israeli teen going and trying to make his way in this majority Israeli elite milieu, and what it means to ride the bus, what it means to sit in class, what it means to celebrate Jewish holidays, try to date an Israeli girl, try not to be picked on and made fun of over different ways and cultural norms. I noticed, by the way, Said, as I was reading the column, at least the column that was reprinted in so many different places when you left Israel, at that moment in 2014 or 15, that you referred,
14,
you referred to, in that column, to the worst week of your life being
yes,
that beginning of your high school experience. And so the students in this class were assigned the section from your book, which included that chapter, The Worst Week of My Life. So much of the fiction inserts your biography all over the place. So I imagine people will be interested in knowing where you stretch things, where you made changes. And I'm especially interested in asking that in light of your most recent book, Akov Acharei Shinuyim. This is the Hebrew cover of that book. I have a library version of it, which doesn't have the English cover, but we'll see a slide of it, because that book is called, in English, it's called Track Changes. And it's about a ghostwriter who takes people's lives, I mean, among other things, it's about a ghostwriter who takes people's life stories and changes them up to include aspects of his own story. So as we go along, please feel free to jump in and say where you want to make clear that this is not you and this is where you fictionalized, or you change the story so that it would have a different fictional effect.
Sure. Although I really don't remember what happened in real life and what not. So I told myself so many lies that I can no longer tell.
Have people asked you whether you have an affinity with the writer Philip Roth, given your penchant to include yourself in fictional scenarios, or different versions of yourself in fictional scenarios?
Not in that context, I think. I wrote about him. I met him once, Philip Roth, somewhere, I think 2004 or 5, I'm not sure. So yeah, some people compared, I think Brett Kaplan, who used to be my boss in the University of Illinois, wrote about that connection, but yes, a little bit.
I'm thinking, Ari and I have talked about how I'm going to come back and teach a class about American Jewish short stories. And when one thinks about Philip Roth's Zuckerman stories and how he spins out different versions of their identity, or something like Operation Shylock, the novel, where he has 2 different versions of Philip Roth. That's something, it seems as though you are very interested in experimenting with different versions of yourself. Yes,
maybe.
Okay, well, I'm going to tell everybody a bit more about the books that you've written. So the first book was Aravim Rokdim, Dancing Arabs. The second book is this, you see in this slide, Vahi Boker, Let It Be Morning. That's 2004. The book that Lizzie, is that your name? That Lizzie has brought to your group's book club is Guf Sheni Yachid, second person singular, which is, this book and your first book, I mean, you continue to be interested, it seems to me, in narratives of passing, the possibilities of being an Arab Israeli and passing for a Jewish Israeli. And of course, that's something that we see in a number of episodes of Avodah Aravit, Arab labor as well. Do you feel relieved that you no longer have to do that in this country? Said, are we frozen? He seems frozen. Is everyone there? Yeah.
Yeah, we're all here. I think okay. he may just be frozen.
He may be frozen.
So
okay.
He'll come back. That, or you shocked him with the question and he
trying to, are you back? Said?
I'm here, yes. I had some troubles, but I was here all the time.
Yeah. Okay, so I moved on in the meantime to so this is the collection of Said Kashua's columns for Haaretz. Said Kashua's writing career began in journalism, writing for, it was Kollel? Is that the newspaper?
That's right.
In Jerusalem.
Yes.
And then he became a regular columnist in Haaretz. And this collection, Ben Haaretz, came out in 2015. So it came out, actually, you were already in the United States when this came out in Hebrew.
Yes.
Which furnishes an amazing irony. Those of you who understand Hebrew will recognize that there's a double entendre in the title, because Ben Haaretz means a native, a son of the land, which of course is, I mean, maybe it's triply ironic, because what does it mean? What does it mean to be native, to be completely native in Israel, when and to be fully a citizen in Israel, but not to be somehow on the margins of the culture? But it also means it's a reference to Haaretz, the newspaper that Said Kashua wrote for. Did you continue writing for Haaretz even after you were living here, or did you stop that as soon as you came to Illinois?
No, actually I continued. I struggled with it. It was not easy at all. I continued until, if I'm not wrong, November 2017, and then I quit.
So that's a very long time. One of the things that would, so this was like an ongoing column that Said Kashua wrote. I recently was reading a column from 2009 that I mentioned to you in an email that was incredibly interesting to me, especially given the publication, the publishers of Haaretz they're the Schocken family, as in Schocken Books in the United States, originally from Germany. And Schocken, that family, they were the patrons of Shmuel Yosef Agnon, Shai Agnon, the Nobel laureate. I just recently read a column by Said Kashua about the experience of bedtime reading, getting into bed, getting comfortable, like the perfect position of the pillows, so as to be able to read the book. And the book that he's reading is Agnon's Shira, a novel that was published posthumously after the Nobel laureate S.Y. Agnon died. And it was a very much awaited novel because it was about all kinds of gossip about academics at Hebrew University. And so Said wrote this essay about reading Agnon's Shira and the uncomfortable feeling of happening upon Agnon's anti-Arab sentiment. And this is all at the backdrop of also hearing some disturbing news about developments in the government with Avigdor Lieberman. That was the reference that came in that column. And what was so remarkable about that essay, among the many remarkable things about it, was that the entire thing was written as if in Agnon's rabbinic prose. And I'm wondering if you can comment for a moment about what it means for you to be a master or to train yourself to be an apprentice to a writer like Agnon, knowing that on some level there's a sneer for Arabs in his writing. And I have to say, I write about Agnon, I love Agnon, and there's that feeling of peering at someone you've always loved, but through a different lens.
To be honest, I completely forgot that I wrote about Shira until your email yesterday, and I just looked it in my computer, and I was happy to find it in my Dropbox collection of columns in Hebrew. And I thought, oh my God, I used to be a good writer because I loved the piece. It was written very well. Yes, I was once good, and there is something about Agnon's writing that it's addicting. Like it's people who read a lot of Agnon find themselves trying to how you say, imitate or write in his addictive style. But for this, it was a trick, confusing Benjamin Netanyahu with Agnon between my wife and myself. Was some kind of just used for painful satirical, I guess. And yes, it is very difficult, to be honest. Maybe that's the reason that I'm still asked why I'm doing my PhD. I said, I read it yesterday. I said, oh my God, I was much smarter before I started my PhD in comparative literature. It is painful because, yes, I don't remember much of Shira rather than that the Arabs mispronounce his name as the professor, and that the primitive Arabs and one cannot help but it's the superiority of the Israeli professorial community and his wife compared to the primitive Arabs. Yes, when you read it as a Palestinian, as an Arab, as someone who lives in Jerusalem, those are the things that capture my attention. I think it's a little bit more sensitive or maybe different reading because of my special position in that literature. So yes, so I think it just adds to the complexity and the challenge of being both a Palestinian and a Hebrew writer, I guess. But if you have, I don't know, I really don't know how long you want my answers to be. I'm waiting for the
No,
question
that's
answer. I
great.
don't want.
Yep, and I'm just going to keep on like moving along with the presentation, and then
Okay.
at various points, I'll
Okay.
turn to you, as long as you're okay with that.
Sure, nothing.
So this is, for those of you who are interested in doing further reading, this is what the English version of Maharat looks like. Okay, so I wanted to use the opportunity of this last class for us to bring together the themes that we've been looking at the past few weeks. And here's where I'm going to invite you all, and you're invited throughout to submit questions to the chat, but I'm wondering if you can reflect on what you see as similar, if you saw similar themes in what I had you read by Said Kashua and what we read by Edgar Keret last week. Okay, so far I'm not, the back and forth. Okay, I'm not going to comment on that. Anyone have anything they want to contribute? If not, I'll just keep on going. So I hope you noticed that in the case of Edgar Keret and Said Kashua, that both in a sense are writing from an outsider perspective. Edgar Keret his characters might be Israeli, but they seem pitted against over and over again, pitted against stronger, more winning, the sort of guy that always gets the woman. And if you recall from the story Siren, the experience of being pitted against the character Sharon, I think he's called, I don't know, Mikey or something like that in the English version. It's hard for me to keep track of the ways in which his characters' names are changed in English, that both of them write in a colloquial style. We're not talking about, the column that Said and I were having a back and forth about is an exception. Much of the writing style that we're looking at is colloquial, street prose, not overly florid, right? And that there's this kind of anti-heroic character. Okay, so now I want us to jump right into what I ask you to look at. This is the cover of Aravim Rokdim. So the stories that I assigned to you are taken from this collection, with the exception of one other story from that same period or that same genre, stories about high school life, called Purim, that I found in an anthology. And you should know, Said, I teach the story Purim every single year at HUC, every single year around Purim. And so it's become a favorite of mine. I don't know how many people talk to you about that story, but I really love it. And I'm looking forward to being able to hear what you think of my reading of the story. Okay, so the toughest day of my life, I mentioned that toughest week of my life, that this particular episode in Said Kashua's life and that particular episode in the book it was referenced in his parting column, the column that he wrote when he decided in 2014 that it was time to leave Israel. This is in the aftermath of the kidnapping of the 3 Israeli boys and then the killing of the Palestinian boys. And I don't know if you want to comment, Said, on what that experience was like for you. I don't know if people ask that of you too often and you want to maybe say no, but we've been referring to it, but we haven't spoken about it directly yet.
Well, that was the summer, and the reason that I left Haaretz, not the newspaper, but the whole thing. So yes, it was very frustrating, painful, still actually traumatic even summer of 2014. After I maybe I would say I even lost hope, and I didn't see any taste to continue this life of being, to live in West Jerusalem and to raise perfect bilingual boys and to sell them fake dreams about possible coexistence as equal in the state of Israel. So yeah, it was. That's the only reason that I'm here. Actually, it's the political reason.
Do your children miss Israel?
No, I don't think they. They're like me. They miss family and friends, I guess. And they don't. I very much hope that I taught my kids not to miss anything national, but to miss personal stuff. The relationship and the weather. I get, but they forgot how it's to live in a maybe a nicer weather. But no, they like it here in the States.
Yeah, you moved them to weather that couldn't be more different than, I guess, the weather in Illinois. Okay, so at the beginning of the book, the beginning of the book, Aravim Rokdim, that section that I had you read, talks about all of the difficulties of a young person joining this kind of high school scenario, having his name misspelled, not knowing the cultural cues, not having the right pants, pronouncing the principal's name Binchas instead of Pinchas. That whole mixing up of the B and the P you alluded to before, Said, in the making fun of the Arabs in Shira as calling him professor instead of professor. When we get to, oh, he's gone. When we get to the story Purim, we'll see how that works, at least in terms of furnishing a special meaning for that particular story. Okay, so I had you read the episode Polanski. I had you read the episode Polanski from Dancing Arabs. And I'm wondering if you recall that episode. Here I'm turning to the class. And if there's something about that episode that reminds you of what we read previously by Etgar Keret, since it didn't work the last time in getting you all to participate in the chat. Do you remember what happens in Polanski? I have the bus there as a cue. This is where Syed is having, to ride the bus, and he runs into a group of really thuggish kind of kids from this Polanski school, okay? So did that remind you of anything that we saw previously? Are you back? I have to get him in. Ari, is he back?
Yeah, I'll find him and
He's not on my screen. He's
going to be down because he came back in later. He's going to be down further, so I'll figure it out while you're talking.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so some of you are referring to the sarcastic, self-deprecating, deadpan humor in the case of both writers. Someone named Ria referred to Keret's story has a happy kind of ending. Sort of. I mean, the siren, he gets saved by the siren, so to speak. Both of the stories are about, and that this is the same for the story Purim that we'll look at later, are about a boy not being able, in a sense, to win in this milieu, not being able to prevail against these bullying types. And that will remind us of the story Siren by Etgar Keret, where the main character, he wants to get the girl, he wants to get in with this group, but he's also drawn and pulled in the direction, what he considers to be the morally correct direction of making sure that this Holocaust survivor's bike isn't stolen, right? So the sense of there being an elite that's connected with the military, the figure, the popular boy who's meant to be the excellent student of the year, he's going through the last stages of his exams to be admitted to an elite unit in the military, right? So imagine that if Etgar Keret's characters are Israelis and they feel outside of that elite milieu, how much more so in the case of an Arab Israeli student who can't who isn't allowed to participate in those mifchanim, those various tests in order to be accepted into military units. Okay, we have an intimation of wanting to pass into that world and wanting to get that training in the episode Shorts, where the high school students go on a tiyul, they go on a hike in Wadi Kilt, and there's a particularly left-wing teacher who's always giving the main character the opportunity to be the one who carries the gun. You know, he might not be able to carry the gun under normal circumstances, but in this scenario, he's being trained as if with the expectation that he can carry the gun. And in the midst of this hike, what happens? What is the uncomfortable scenario that the main character finds himself in? Did we lose the screen share? Okay, sorry. You have it all back? Okay, I was trying to be able to get the chat. Okay, do you remember what happens? So in the midst of this tiyul, because this is a popular hiking spot for everybody, in a place in Israel that kind of overlaps between the Arab population and the Jewish population. Everybody likes to go hike there. So here's the main character on his hike, running into his old class from his old neighborhood before he came to this school, and there's a real deadpan, uncommented on reflection on the ways in which the Israeli kids sing discriminatory songs about the Arabs, and the Arab kids sing discriminatory songs about the Jews, and no one really quite understands exactly what they're saying, and yet they kind of understand what they're saying. And in the midst of all of that, being unmasked as someone who travels between these two groups and not wanting to be unmasked, right? So his old schoolmates say, hey, look, it's him over there in the shorts. Why is it so important that he's wearing shorts? Why is it so important that he's wearing shorts? Said, are you there? Can you comment on why it matters that he's wearing shorts? Is that really like culturally unacceptable in the community that you came from?
Yes, to be honest, I think it should be unexpected. Like it should be something wrong to do anywhere. I don't know. Yeah, it was like, you know, the shorts. It's here more than the shorts of the kibbutznik rather than the Israeli or the Jewish. It just symbolizes becoming or turning or trying to do his best to become Israeli, I guess.
So kibbutznik like shorts. Dressing in a So that's really interesting. If we think back to the first week in which we were reading together, and we met in the story Tapuchim min Hamidbar by Savion Liebrecht, how Victoria, her mother, sees her daughter wearing these short shorts, and she says, "What's with those shorts?" Right? And so suddenly a piece of clothing is freighted. It carries the weight of all this symbolism of becoming, you know, part of a whole Zionist, secular Zionist ethos. One of the various cultural difficulties that the main character, the protagonist in Aravim Rokdim has, is getting used to or not knowing the codes, not knowing the cultural norms, not liking the right music, not knowing who the Beatles are, and reflecting on learning to acquire the taste of the Beatles and other kinds of music, whatever it is that is accepted and in mode in the school. I don't have enough time to spend on this particular slide the way I would like to if we had an hour or two. I would play it for you so you could see the difference between the Beatles and what the students in the school we're listening to, and the Arab music that the protagonist is used to, and what a shock it would be to learn how to acquire that different taste. So when I share the PowerPoint with you'll be able to listen and watch this YouTube video of Abdel Halim Hafez, who is an Egyptian kind of heartthrob singer from that time, who was playing music that is closer to what my father would have listened to in the 1940s and 50s, rather than the next generation of music, at least just in the sound. It's not rock. Okay, I wanted to comment for a moment on this chapter, Once an Arab, Always an Arab. And I wanted to ask Said if it was okay with you to comment on what that expression means for you, because I think it has at least 2, if not 3 different possible meanings in the context of this story, which is taking place in the Gulf War, where the people in Tira are rooting for Saddam, and in fact, it's kind of perpetuating the story that you can see the picture of Saddam and the moon. That's what this picture on the slide is. If you can look carefully, you'll see the face of Saddam that is meant to be teased out from the picture. So can you comment for us, Said, on how you're viewing that expression, once an Arab, always an Arab?
I'm not sure. Well, if I remember well, it was the father trying to explain to his son, like, it doesn't matter how hard you will assimilate or try or to do your best to become part of the Israeli community, you'll never be accepted because you're Jewish and you're Arab, and you'll always be the other for generally speaking, yes, for the Israeli community. So that's the thing. It's not about the language, it's not about the music, it's not about the way you dress, it's not about your views or whatever. You will always be considered and pointed as the other, as the Arab, as the threat. And I guess it's a little bit, it's this essentialism that it's really very strong, and usually it is very strong in the Israeli society to think that there is it's like a different mentality. The Arabs have a different mentality. It's not about economic, cultural, socioeconomic situations that builds your thoughts or views or your behavior or whatever. But unfortunately, among the Israelis, I guess not only among the Israelis, but many other people around the world think that different groups are genetically different. Like the structure of their mind is different. Therefore, they cannot be trusted, and therefore we define ourselves as their opposite or not being them. So I guess that's the maybe, if I remember well. It's a very old book,
Well, it's a good, when we get to our age, at this age, you have to do mind exercises if you're going to stay sharp.
Yes.
I would, one thing that I wanted to point out about that once an Arab, always an Arab, is that it sounds a lot. It's like the Arab version of an expression that was said to me growing up, once a Jew is always a Jew. As much as you might want to try and assimilate, the Gentiles are never going to accept you. The positive iteration of it is you're always going to be a Jew. It's always in your neshama that you're going to be a Jew. And so that expression either is a marker of the limitations, the ways in which another society will never accept you, or it's some sort of comfort food for knowing that there's some identity that can never be taken away from you, that it runs very deep. It's not just a superficial thing. And it seems to me that much of your writing and your fiction is testing out that premise, whether you can pass out of that identity, whether there's always this kernel of how, no matter how far you go, no matter how estranged you may be from where you came from, or that there's this, essentialism that Said referred to essentialism, and the ideology of essentialism, on the one hand, can be seen as a kind of racist ideology. On the other hand, it's a way of referring to a kind of identity that sticks with you, that in a positive sense, that you're not uprooted. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
I really do not know what is Arabness, to be honest. Like, I don't know what that means. It's not, I don't know, rather than a language. And I don't see anything special speaking one language or another. It's not being naive, or of course. First of all, if anything, yes, of course. Maybe I would say the mentality of being a Palestinian minority in Israel would be stronger than this Arabness thing that I'm not sure that I can point at. But I guess we don't want to go into national identities and how they are built or whatever. So basically, generally speaking, I'm not a huge believer in deep roots and identities.
So in that
I
sense,
belong there.
yeah. So in that sense, that whole title is very ironic for you, right? It's a position that's taken by, it's a kind of a prejudice that, in a sense, your writing is straining against.
Yes, I hope so. Yes. I very much hope that it writes against essentialism and fixed identities. That doesn't mean that identities are very, very, very strong, especially from the place that I'm coming from and here. But sometimes it's strong enough to want to point at you in order to define you. I don't believe in this the self-identity or the self-determination or whatever. I don't need that. Sometimes it's powerful enough that one targets you or point at you as the other, as different, as Palestinian, as Muslim, to make it a very strong identity to protect yourself against that accusation or being received as a threat. So I'm not saying that it's not powerful and it's that I'm rejecting the idea that I'm Arab or Palestinian. Yes, I am, but I don't think it's holy. It's not a holy thing for me. I'm trying just to figure out where it comes from and to understand it rather than to stick to it as some kind of a religion.
Speaking of religion, I asked the students to look at this chapter, matzah, matzahs.
Yeah.
And here's a picture of the buying of matzah in a Palestinian store. And it's something of a revelation to find out how much, in your community, how much people loved matzah, and the comparison between matzah and a krembo. How many of you know what a krembo is? Krembo is a type of snack food in Israel that you can only get in the winter. It's kind of like Malamars, that a cookie that you can, or a kid's food that you can only have in certain times, because in the summer it would just melt. So matzah, like krembo, is something that I guess it was only available in stores around this time of year. Is that what it was?
Yes. I have packs of matzah, by the way, until now, because like 3 months ago, I thought people are going to finish all the bread in stores, and I bought a lot of
So
matzah.
you bought matzah?
And they don't know, yes, and I've been eating matzah for a month, and I really, like the whole March, I spent it with matzah, and I cannot eat it for 2-3 years now.
So you got that. It took you 3 weeks to get where we get after a month of Pesach.
Yes. It's a week of Pesach, yeah.
So what I love about this story is how you present, without any commentary, the prejudices of both communities, right? So the reflecting and the describing of the story of Dr. Jihad, who goes missing for a while, at least, I don't know, maybe for half a day, and his mother spins this whole story that he's been abducted. So it's a blood libel narrative, which is very for Jews, the blood libel narrative, it was real. It wasn't just a joke. And to have that given over in this funny, humorous, uncommented upon way is very powerful. And you don't flinch in the face of showing the prejudices of that community at the same time as you don't flinch at showing the prejudices of the Israeli community or the Jewish community, because in the same story, you describe your protagonist being invited for a Pesach Seder and meeting this Argentinian, young Ola, who doesn't know that that there in the house is this young Arab boy who's, staying with his left-wing friend for Pesach. And he's trying to impress this girl and asking, do you have any Arabs in your school? And she says, that there's no such thing as a good Arab. And then, the irony of not knowing, he knows that he's there. She doesn't know who he really is. So that experience of living in between the prejudices of two communities is very powerful. Can you comment on that? Is that something that just must have been like a ringing in your ears all the time, in both ears?
Yes. I think, yes, I think that of course, there's a lot of, again, generally speaking, a lot of hatred between the Israelis and Palestinians. I guess that's not a secret. And as a kid, before going to the high school, I think that I grew up listening to horrible stories, and of course, the Jews who killed my grandfather in '48 during the war, and imprisoned my father, who was a student. They took the land and did all these horrible things for Palestinians, and still doing that. Of course, I heard all awful stories, but I went to the high school, or encountered the Israeli society. Yeah, I learned also about the deep racism against Arabs, and it is of course awful. Yes, I'm not saying that this kind of racism or that kind of racism is better, or something like that. Not at all. But I think that usually the one who got the power can control the discourse, and I think it is the Israelis who are the powerful people in Israel, Palestine, and they do really control the discourse, and I think that they can change it. And I guess that, I'm sorry to say that, but I think yes, the Palestinians are taught. Maybe they have good reasons to be scared or to hate the Israeli, because for them, the Israeli or the Jew, sometimes most of the Palestinians do not differentiate between an Israeli and Jewish. For them, any Jew is the Israeli. And for most of the Palestinians, the Israeli means the soldier or the settler, the one who's not letting him go to work, or taking his land, or taking his home, or shooting at him. That's the reality. Yes, of course, I'm running from a place that the gap and the hatred is really, really very, very deep. And I thought, as someone who deals with culture and writing and TV, this naive thinking to make changes through culture, through writing, through TV shows. But again, yes, it was very frustrating. I think in 2014, again, I just couldn't handle that any longer. I ran away to a place that no one knows me. And here it's easier. I mean, it's not like America, there is no racism in America or whatever. No, not at all. It's just here I'm a visitor. And then when I ask by a taxi driver, where is that accent from or where you come from, that I hear that all the time. I just say Albania. Hopefully the taxi driver or whatever is not himself from Albania. And because no one knows how Albanians look like, what is an Albanian accent, and I'm leaving in a week. anyone, whenever I'm asked, I'm living in a week, I'm here as a tourist. So I'm taking no responsibilities for the space. My kids are facing horrible times. Um, so yes, what I'm trying to say, I guess, that there is no symmetry between racism, deep racism, and deep hatred from both sides. I will always blame the stronger one, as the same way that I will always blame the older boy when the kids fight. I will always blame the one who can put an end to it or have the power to change it a little bit. Yes, I guess.
I'm going to move on to the next story, just because I know that itself can become a whole debate among our community and the people that are assembled here and you. And I want to make sure that we get through some more of the stories, but perhaps at the end we can.
It should be a debate in your community.
Yeah. Well, the truth of the matter is, I too am a visitor to this particular community, so I wouldn't be able to.
Okay.
I wouldn't be able to say. I haven't been able. The wonderful thing about Zoom is that we all get together. Here we are. I'm teaching students in California, and we've never met, or I've only met some of them, so I wouldn't be able to predict.
Okay.
Okay, so the story takes. I mean, you did not read the entire book, so you don't get the perspective after the high school and marriage and so on. Time is sort of arrested in high school from the selection that I gave you. But there's this moment in the story where the main character has an interest in a girl in the school, and things are rocky at first, but on Yom HaAtzmaut of all days, she confesses her love to him. And for that one little moment, it's similar to the Edgar Keret story, Tzvira, Siren, because for that one little moment, it's though he wins. That, we have a sense that it's not going to last forever. But for that one little, and of course, for it to be taking place against the backdrop of Yom HaAtzmaut, that itself is very, very ironic. I wanted to just let you know that the material from Aravim Rokdim that you read, part of that and sections from your next book, right? Isn't it? It's kind of an amalgam, that book. The film Borrowed Identity includes material from Dancing Arabs, but also from your novel Second Person Singular, right?
Yes.
So I just wanted you to know that you can watch the film A Borrowed Identity and get a sense of how this material was turned into film. Okay, I wanted to spend a moment talking about Purim, and then we'll open it up to questions. So this story, Purim, is not included in Dancing Arabs, but like I said, it takes the same scenario of an Arab-Israeli student at an elite Israeli high school. And it's set against the backdrop we saw previously in Matzahs. We had what is it like for an Arab-Israeli student to celebrate Pesach and the idea of being liberated from Egypt. There's a whole irony around that, where the Arab is celebrating a holiday, and the main foe of that holiday is Egypt. So a country that was invested in pan-Arab identity and so on. In Purim, you have this predicament of the Arab-Israeli student celebrating this holiday of Purim. And I wanted to open up to you and ask you what you thought the special significance is of that holiday choice, and what that holiday choice allows the story to explore. So what came to your mind in terms of the significance of choosing that holiday? Sorry, I was trying to open the chat, and I closed the screen.
You're asking me, sorry?
I wanted to ask the community first before I ask you. Thank you, Sam. Okay, I'll ask you because no one's answering. So why Purim of all the holidays? Do you remember the story? Said?
Sorry? Yes, I think. That's I think it was one of the very first short stories that I published, Purim, in some kind of anthology. There were two short stories.
Yeah.
Maybe I really was maybe 20 back then, so I apologize.
It's a good story for a 20-year-old.
Yeah. I told you. My father used to say that I'm like a camel. With the years, my value goes down. So I used to be good, just losing of my value. I remember that Purim. I think it's a story about high school, and of course Purim is really very important. I think I used it in one of the episodes of also in Arab Labor that Amjad, the protagonist, was of course in Purim he will be the soldier, and he was kidnapped by Palestinian Hamas as an Israeli soldier, and even his father didn't want him back. Like, not the Israeli government wanted, well, no one wanted him back. So Purim, it's a very good opportunity to shape identities, and Purim is a very good identity to use what it's called a carnival's way of writing, when the Arab can be a Jew and the Jew can be the Arab, and then to some kind of change the social or the national strict identities in Purim. But if I remember well, he fails by the end. Like the girl that he loves speaks to the pilot, to the real pilot, not to the.
Yeah, so there are a few things in the story that are really fascinating to me. Number one, because you mentioned the issue of the B's and the P's and the difficulty for someone coming from the Arab language, from Arabic, to pronounce the P in Purim. So if you pronounce Purim with that accent, it's Burim. And a bur, a bur in Hebrew is someone who's uncouth, uneducated, sort of vulgar. And part of what the story is investigating is who is the cultured one, who is the elite. Here is the protagonist living in this Israeli dorm, and at first he's placed with the one other Arab in the school, and there's a whole scatological discussion about bathroom norms and the assumption that just because you're Arab, that you're going to be exactly the same. And these two Arab kids, they discovered that they're coming from different, they have different bathroom etiquette. And then there's Moti, his roommate, the Israeli from Beit Vagan, who is observant, who's religious, who never washes his hands when he goes to the bathroom. And comes back from home with a bottle of vodka that he's going to share with his roommate, because of course it's a mitzvah to drink on Purim, when that itself hurls us into the predicament of someone coming from a Muslim background where drinking would be prohibited. So the very thing that's being commanded as a mitzvah for the Jew is the thing that's anathema to the Arab. And then that experience of drinking, which Moti, his roommate, is laid out flat on his bed, falling asleep, and the drunken protagonist goes down to this Purim party in the hope of being able to catch the girl that he loves, and only to discover that she's with Yoav, the would-be pilot, that again, the He-Man character that I mentioned earlier on, that the anti-heroic character is always pitted against. And he's hoping in this carnival moment, previously Naomi had said, I think that's what her name is, similar to in Aravim Rokdim, that she had wanted the year before to dress up as an Arab for Purim. And then this year, he wishes, he hopes that carnival atmosphere of Purim can allow norms to be overturned. But instead, you're right, he doesn't get the girl. Now, there is an interesting moment at the end of the story that maybe you'll comment on, and you'll tell me whether you think I'm reading it right. In my class, we talk about the choice of Moti as the roommate, given that Moti is diminutive for Mordechai. I don't know if you intended that. And another thing is the question of the significance of the end, where he sees his former girlfriend with this pilot wannabe, and they're both they have signs on their backs as their costumes, and one says Hanasich shel Nomi ve Hanasicha shel Yoav. So Nomi's prince and Yoav's princess, except that he notices, the protagonist, that there's a missing yud, there's a misspelling on her sign at the back. And that's how the story ends, with him recognizing the Hebrew spelling mistake. And I'm wondering if you can comment on what you meant there, and then I'll tell you what I think it means.
I still don't believe that I used Moti's real name in the short story.
Is that his name?
Judge now. We're good friends. I don't know. I think that I remember, really, it was a very, 25 years ago. Yes, I remember. Nafal Yod Vanisicha. Like, something is fake about this prince. Something is just, like, I'm so happy that there's something wrong in writing the prince. She's not the prince. There's something not perfect about it. Something that doesn't work for the two perfect girl and boy dancing together in Purim. I think just I know more than them, a little bit more better than they do, I guess. But so yeah, somehow I remember that last sentence even in Hebrew. But no, Moti was the real name. I didn't think about.
You didn't think about it.
Well, Mordechai, no.
It works well in the story. I'll say this, and this sort of takes me back to the initial argument that I was trying to make about the Yiddish nature of your writing, maybe unwitting, that to say that the Yud has fallen from her name, and here is this Israeli Arab protagonist who's reading Kierkegaard, he's intellectual, he's philosophical, his Hebrew spelling is better than some of his peers. To notice that the Yud is missing is, in Yiddish, that there's an expression, the pintele Yid, that the essence of a Jew. And there's something, it feels as though something is lost in that culture, lost in terms of what core, if you can speak of core Jewish values, that the outsider is noticing and, in a sense, exemplifying. I don't know if you want to be anointed an honorary Yid. I don't imagine that that's at all what you're after, but that in effect is what happens in the story, that because this boy is recognizing what it means to be an outsider and what it means to be ignored and not to be expected to be part of a mainstream culture that he could never be a part of. That's so much of the Jewish experience, pre-state, that it's almost as though that Yud is passed over to your narrator.
Yes. Again, I wish I was a Yiddish boy. I have no, but I'm not. But it's more about the Jewish writing and the Yiddish writing. It's about being a minority, being a scared, the other, that always need to be aware of the fact that he needs to protect himself. That's the thing that I think that's why I like Shalom Aleichem and Mendele Mocher Sfarim and Bishev Zinger and the Yiddish writers. And by the way, so at one point I said that Edgar Keret and will remember the name soon, that are the only diasporic Israeli writers in Israel. Meanwhile, I discovered many other diasporic Israeli writers in Hebrew. Like they were not notified that that there is a Jewish state called Israel in their writing. But it is about, I think it is this minority way of writing. It's the otherness way of writing. One can call it maybe the minor writing, as against protecting or trying to subvert something bigger, something more stronger, to make room in a different language, in a different space, and to make sense of myself first in the Hebrew language, I guess. So yes, I think I'm always blamed for the Jewish humor, and I take that as a compliment. Really, I like Jewish humor, most of it.
So I imagine I'm turning to you, Ari, in terms of whether we need to wrap up because we're 10 minutes over.
Well, I think we do. I just want to respect Said's time, and I wanted to thank Said for being with us. And it was a surprise. No one really knew, other than
Including me until a few days
right.
ago.
That I tried to keep it a
Thank you so much.
surprise, just given your timing and hoping you join us. So I do have a quick question for you. Is that I really do enjoy your writing. It does have a lot. It makes me laugh. I've watched Arab Labor, and my question is, what does your family think? Because you poke fun at them in particular. Your parents appear in your books and in Arab Labor. Are they offended? Do they laugh at what you've done? Do they, how do they react to your writing? Your close family, your parents. I don't know if they're still alive or when they were alive. What did they think about being portrayed in how they were portrayed in your books and in the television show?
הם יצאו בזול. How you translate הם יצאו בזול in English? No, I was kidding. יצאו בזול, like they were relieved after reading it. Like
They
the
got
truth would
off.
be
They
much
got
harder.
off cheaply.
Yes. Honestly, I was a little bit worried, but they were the biggest fans of my writing. And I was very harshly criticized by many, just for the fact that they write in Hebrew, just for, that they choose the Hebrew. We're talking here about a very, very complex national war and struggle, yes? So first you're neglecting the Arabic language, which is the major part of your Arabic Palestinian identity, and then you choose to write in Hebrew. It's some can accuse it of being the enemy's language. But my parents were very big supporters of my writing since the first novel. The first novel was a nightmare. Actually, it was my wife's parents who really hated it, including my wife, and because I promised her it's not going to be published. No one is going to publish the book. But no, my parents were, until this very day, sometimes like they will ask questions. Oh, really? Was it like that way? I lost my father. That was one of the painful things here. Almost 5 years ago, just half a year after we moved to the States, it was something that happened. He was 67, was diagnosed with lung cancer, and he died within a few months. And my mother is still alive, and I hope I have to check today. And they're very big supporters. It's something that was very important for me, especially amidst the harsh criticism from many Arab journalists, writers, critics. So it was tough. They had really to stand by me and sometimes to protect me, and not physically, but to give me the support I needed back then, because I was not expecting such a harsh criticism from the Arab readers. I don't know if they read, just accusers of just the use of the language, because I can understand that it's a horrible situation. The idea of being stuck in the middle, will use that term, or trying to, I don't know. It's not that I was trying to bridge, but to dare treat identities as not holy, or to dare to challenge the concept of this is Jewish and this is Arab and this is Israeli and this is Palestinian, this is Muslim and this is Jew. It's not usually accepted by both sides in a very understanding way. Yes. Having said that, I was doing very, very well and many readers and viewers from both sides. Somehow people hated watching or reading me, but also enjoyed suffering doing that, I guess. Because I cannot say that I was, unnoticed. I don't know.
Another question that came up was just how, say, the writing may have how your writing may have changed now that you've been living in America for, I guess, over 5 years. Has anything changed in your writing, sensibilities, anything like that?
The last novel that I wrote, it was a little bit about immigration. It's a novel that I started writing. It changed a little bit. Actually, it changed a lot because I lost my father, and it became a huge part of the last novel. But it's an idea that I was working on before we left Jerusalem to live in the Midwest. I stopped working for Haaretz because I felt like the column is no longer about this Arab drunk young man who's trying to fit in to discover that he's always rejected. And nowadays we just finished. Now we're shooting. Shooting is bad, but filming the third season of Shtisel that I was involved in editing the third season.
Wait, hang on. You're saying that you were involved in editing Shtisel?
The script, yes. I'm the script advisor and editor of Shtisel 2 and now 3. And
so you just proved my thesis of you as a Yiddish writer.
Yes. A Yiddish writer? Yeah, yes. Yeah, I know a lot of Yiddish, but it's written originally in Hebrew. It's written in Hebrew. And all the Yiddish, I received the Yiddish with some kind of translation. I love Shtisel. I really love this.
That's a great show.
Yes. So yes, I'm writing short stories. I really hate to write about direct political issues in Israel living abroad. I think like I don't, it's not that I don't like people writing about Israel if they don't live there, or about Palestine if they don't live, but I feel a little bit uncomfortable as someone who, left the struggle, ran away, was defeated, and then to criticize it. So I felt a little bit bad writing that. I'm trying to find different languages, different issues to deal with. After publishing Track Changes, I published several columns and short stories, but mainly I'm working on TV, trying first projects and developing for the first time 2 different projects for American studios. We'll see how that will end up. Yes.
Maybe Ari, you can share with the group later the column that Said shared with us about the experience of lockdown. It just now, so you can see that Said, as an American writer, is living the same crisis that we're all living, trying to figure out how best to keep his family safe, and discovering that you can maybe be a little bit too careful sometimes. Trying to keep your kid out of the hospital, and the kid will end up in the emergency room anyway.
Yes, a talented family.
And just a question about your writing, because we are running out of time. So your contemporary writing, are you still writing in Hebrew? And then who is translating it to English?
Yes, well, the some of the short stories, yes. Originally, I wrote them in Hebrew. I dared to write this short column with, knowing very well that there is an editor to take care of it. It's really so difficult for me. I feel so, bad about writing scripts in English because I'm writing them to American producers, but I don't feel the same. I don't know if natural would be a good word to use when writing. Nothing is natural about writing. So it is difficult. It's not easy. Actually, it's much easier to write academic papers. But when it comes to find the small details of human body or gestures in English, I find it very, very difficult to find the right words for that. But to be honest, I guess that if I write a novel and I'm planning as soon as I'm done with my, it's to go back to the Hebrew. I debated the question of Hebrew a lot when I moved. What about the Hebrew? I can no longer be want to be accused of using the Hebrew about identity. But I think that just really recently I realized that part of my writing is to write not in my mother tongue, whatever that means. It is I need the language to be a challenge. I need the language a little bit to reject me. I need to find my space in that language. It feels like part of my writing is just to feel stranger to the language itself. I know that it sounds stupid a little bit because my Hebrew is much better than my Arabic when it comes at least to writing, but I think I need that. I need to fight the language, to challenge the language. I think it's a big part of my writing, to find a space, to subvert, to challenge, in this case, the Hebrew language. But the truth is that I can write only in Hebrew, like a story, a short story. I'm not talking here about a script I'm not talking about an academic paper, but if I want to sit down and write a short story or a novel, I have a feeling that I cannot run away from Hebrew yet.
Lizzie had a question, which was, are there any Israeli Jewish writers who you think represent the Arab experience accurately? Do you have any writers to recommend to us? This is a group of avid readers who are very interested in, obviously, in Israel and in culture and in this liminal state you're talking about, because as Professor Zierler mentioned, as Jews living outside of Israel, we all feel that we are in that. I mean, many of us feel in that state. We are American, but we're also Jewish, and so we're in this liminal state. But going back to the original question was, are there writers that you think represent the Arab experience that we should read, or any writers in general that you recommend, that you want to share with our group so we can look them up and enjoy them?
The Arab experience. Well, yes, it's Arab experience. There are many experiences. You mean Israeli writing in Hebrew, or any book that's translated to English from Palestinian writers?
Probably for this group, we want a writer that we have access to that we can read in English. Yeah. But you could say there's a great writer, and we could figure it out as well. But is anybody you recommend that you think that people should read to get a better understanding of a different perspective?
In English, yes, a different perspective. Yes, because of my studies. To be honest, I truly think that the untranslated books written now by young Arab writers in Arabic in Israel are way more interesting than the famous ones translated into English. They are brilliant writing from Palestinians in Israel, but I'm not sure that they are all translated. One of the youngest, more experimental, but that I love her works a lot, her name is Adania Shibli, Adania Shibli, Shibli. I think 3 of her novels, short novels, usually are published now into English. There is the winner, which is an interesting book by Rabbi Al-Madhoun. Actually, he won a few years ago. He won the Arab Booker Award. It's called the International Arabic Prize or Award for Literature. Rabbi Al-Madhoun. I think it's called Fates, the Concerto of Nakba and Holocaust. He was born in 1945 before the Nakba in Ashkelon and moved to Gaza. That's some kind of a memoir, a fictional memoir, which can be interesting, and of course it's translated also into Hebrew. The most influential, I guess, was published in Hebrew in 1985. Would be Anton Shammas. By the way, he's a professor at Ann Arbor. You're son should be there. No. He also, after publishing a wonderful novel called Arabesque, Anton Shammas, he's the first Palestinian citizen of Israel to write a great novel. Again, in 1985, it was published in Hebrew, but of course translated to tens of languages. And he also moved to the States after publishing one novel in Hebrew, Arabesque. And probably I forgot some. And Lizzie, you're more than welcome to be in touch, just to understand what kind of materials you're looking for. And I have to check if some of the novels are translated to English, because I'm not sure what was translated and what not.
Thank you. I do think Professor Zierler, we may have to wrap it up. We went longer. I mean, I tend to keep it short, but when we have someone like, say, Kashua on with us, I didn't want to. I wanted to maximize our opportunity to interact with you, and I wanted to wish you well in your writing. We're looking. I mean, I guess I didn't know you're writing with Stiesel, which is a very interesting fact. Many of us, most of us, have watched it and enjoyed it, and I do. I never really watched Arab Labor before, but in preparation for this program, I started to watch it. If you have not watched it, I would highly recommend it. I think the Tafts should watch it if they haven't. It's very funny. It reminds me of how Noah writes. Their son is a screenwriter as well, a former screenwriter from Hollywood. Very fast, very quick, very funny, and very enjoyable. I hope you all have enjoyed this series. I want to thank Professor Zierler for putting it together, for giving us some great writers. Many of us maybe knew some of the writers. Certainly my guess is most of you did not know all the writers. And I hope you keep reading. These are great writers. You know, Professor Zierler shared a little bit of each of what they have written. So go home. You now have, we'll do another series on American Jewish writers sometime in the future. But for now, go and read the books and enjoy and laugh and grow. And great books, great stories. Lizzie, thank you for leading our book group. Syed, thank you for being with us and taking time out of your busy schedule.
Pleasure.
Good luck in St. Louis.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Syed and I have to have a coffee when I come to St. Louis.
Yes, please, with pleasure. Thanks.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Talk to you soon. Bye, Lizzie. Bye, everybody.